Hello, everybody. My name is Margarita Diaz. I'm an English teacher too. I'm currently working in Barranca Bermeja, Santander, in a public school. And today I'm going to tell you about this pedagogical experience I had when I was almost like 2 years ago, with journals. And it is entitled Journaling as a Tool to Reflect and Express from a Critical Literacy Perspective. So, how all this idea started and began, it was because previously I had the opportunity to work with journals myself to reflect about my teaching practices. So I knew the benefits and the benefits and the characteristics and how to handle this tool. So I had also some students that were telling me that they were not learning, that they don't know English, that they didn't understand anything, and I wanted to show them that they are not in the same place when they started, I don't know, that academic year or from sixth grade. So I remember the uses of, or not let's say the uses. I remember the benefits of using a journal, and I decided to work with them on that. I also wanted to show the students um, the importance of using the language with a purpose. And at that time, I was doing my master's studies, and we talk about critical literacy, and it immediately clicked on me because I not only wanted them to teach a language or a code and to develop with on them or with them communicative competence process, but I also wanted them to do something with what they knew or with what were they were about to learn. So this is where I found in critical literacy an amazing tool, because I saw the opportunity for them to be critical and to face all the challenges they had around them. The base, oh well, this when I talk about the participants, I would like to tell you that they were 11th graders from a public school, as I said, that I'm currently working, and they were from different socioeconomical backgrounds. Their ages varied from 15 to 18 years old, and at the time I had two classes. Each class was average like 40 students. So where is all the base or the theoretical basis of this? As I told you, is based on reflection and critical literacy. But reflection was just the starting point, because it is an educative process. As Roger says, it is a meaning-making process in which the learner moves from one experience into the next. So that's what I wanted to show them, that they were moving, that there was a process, or not, but that they were doing something. Also, when it comes to critical literacy, I wanted to show my students that we were not only learning a language, but that they had power on that language, because critical literacy deals at the end of it with that, with language and power, and it's grounded on the examination of the contradictions that we can find in society. But it also talks about a transformation. As Hilary Jan says, critical literacy education is based on a sociocultural theory of language. It's particularly concerned with teaching learners to understand and manage the relationship between language and power. And also, Wendy Morgan talks about how us as teachers, we need to promote conditions for a different textual practice. Now, how all this happened? As I told you, I use journals. How? I wanted to give them in journals a platform in which they could combine the critical literacy experiences and their reflective practices. The excuse I used was narrative text, and we also analyzed the narrative text using the full resource model by Luke and Freebody. They talk about this model first in 1999, but then they updated it 9 years later. Here you have like this link in which you can find more information about it, but I will later explain basically how the full resource model empowers the student towards a text. Next, I will tell you about the stages related to this experience. So, the first thing we did was to create journals. I gave them main, or let's say basic instructions, that they had to create them from scratch, that they must use renewable resources, and that I wanted them to express themselves on their um, journals. Also, probably I gave them, uh, yeah, I think, yeah, I did. I gave them the quantity of pages they needed, but that was basically it. The rest was up to them. I asked them not to use a notebook because I wanted them to create their own journal. Then the second step was to choose the text. We read in total 5 texts. From those texts, I previously chose 2, but I gave them the opportunity to choose the rest of them. How did I do it? I gave them some options, so I was controlling that, let's say, but at the end it was up to them to choose the rest of the text to read. They read some parts of, or some extracts from those texts, and they decided based on that using Google Forms. um, yeah, using Google Forms. uh, the third, and let's say the bigger, uh, or the biggest step, was reading the actual text and journaling. So I will express this as the analysis of the text using the full resource model, and the reflection as a consequence of it. And now we have the topics and the readings. As I told you, what I did was to I was thinking about what kind of context were they involved, and I chose family, school, the world, and our future. Based on that, I started to look for a narrative texts that were related to those big topics. That's how I found a beast that well, you have here these 5. 2 of them were poems, and the rest of them were short stories. Okay, so the full resource method was the methodology I used to analyze the text. Why? Because it is a description to validate practices for a reader, especially literacy practice for a reader that wants to participate in an active and critical way in the world through text. So it is divided in 4 roles: the code breaker, the text participant, the text user. The analysis and the reflection was what we did after applying or using this method. For each one of the readings, we did this. And the first role, let's say, is as a code breaker. In this case, linguistic aspects such as decoding the letters, the symbols, and graph are analyzed. For example, here I'm showing you some of the questions I did for one of the readings, like what words are interesting, what words are new, what words are familiar. So in this form, we were focusing only on the text as a code. The second role is as a text participant, in which the reader takes part um, by giving meaning to the text from their own experience and their own perspective. So, what they are as a person, what makes them, how they understand from their perspective the text. So that's when I asked them, how did you feel as you read the text? What might happen next? So it became important how they were as learners, as teenagers, to predict, to talk about their feelings, and it was different the answer from student to student because it was very personal. The third role was as a text user. In this one, the reader uses the information in the text and is aware of the cultural and social um, context in which it was written. So, what text type is it? What is the purpose of the text? So, let's say, what is the intention of the author with this text? And finally, the third role is as a text analysis. So I have this question for them, for example, what is the most important learning that you take from the text? So in this time, they are critics of the text. They need to think critically about them and to see what messages are hiding uh, or are hiding, yes, are hiding behind the text there. And finally, we had a reflection. For example, if you were the author, what other ending will you give to the story? So I gave them the opportunity to own the story and to change things if they wanted, or to let them like as they thought they were okay, if that was the case, sorry. And if you are the main character, how will you have acted with your family? This one was one of the readings that we talk about family. It was about a beast. So it was really interesting to do this for each reading. For each reading, I try to create a set of questioning that was related to it based on the model. Now, what are the significance, or what is the significance of using journals? What is the pedagogical, or what are the pedagogical implications behind this tool? The first thing that I needed to say is that journals had or were an instrument with a personal touch for the students. They um, found, or they give to each journal a genuine representation of their personalities. So they were transmitting a message of who they were as a person. Who are they? They were expressing that on their journals. Also the students explore and use the language with a communicative purpose, and it was very specific because they wanted to express their feelings, their wishes, their intentions, their dreams, the reasons behind their fears. And also they made personal analysis and imagine ideal situations, but they did all this through English by using the language. Another important aspect is related to the writing process. The students started a writing process on their own. That was not my main intention when using journals and analyzing the narrative text through the four resource model. What I wanted was them to reflect, to see their learning process and everything, but they taught me that when they were creating or giving their reflections, they started a writing process on their own because they started to draft. They didn't want to write a text or to draw something or to create a poster from and at the first try that was their product. No, they say like, hey, can you check these? They ask help to their classmates and ask them how was the spelling of a word, or if they could check it, correct it. So they were drafting, editing, and yeah, they revised, they corrected, and so on. At the end, they created a final product. And actually, when I was checking that product, some of them told me like, hey, please, can you not write on my journal, because it became really important to them. So they were using the language, they were expressing themselves, and they were developing abilities and competences through the language. The second outcome that I would like to talk about is related, of course, to the critical literacy's role, because in this case, the texts that I use were related to the realities. We have talked about a long time ago that we need to focus on our students' interest and our students' needs, and it is also to see the reality, the context where they were. Why? Because I wanted them to feel that they own, that they knew what they were talking about. It was not something external, it was not something, let's say, foreign for them. On the contrary, it was significant, and that's why they had these significant and creative productions. Um, we also broke the rules because they were in charge of some things that normally or typically a teacher does. When you give them the opportunity to choose what to read, you are still controlling the type of text. You can use not only narrative text but any other type of text, informative and so on. But the idea is to give them choices, to give them the power of choosing. And they also were being critical when they were giving opinions, when they were explaining the realities, when they were answering provocative questions. Related to the text, it didn't matter the length of the text. We had short stories that had certain, let's a considerable quantity of words, but we had some poems that were really short. The importance was on what they were analyzing, and on what were on sorry on what they were doing with the text. So we have this text, but what can we do with that? What can we get from that? Where can we go from that text to? So they were comparing the text, they were comparing the author's point of view with their own point of view, and they were giving an opinion related to if what they believe was okay or not, or if what the author was proposing was okay or not. A third, let's say, outcome that I would like to talk about is related to reading narrative, to a reading comprehension process. As I told you before, you can use any other type of text. It doesn't matter because at the end of it, it is just the excuse we're using to develop these processes with the students. We, of course, had a pre-reading, a while reading, and after reading stage. In the pre-reading, we did all this anticipation and we were predicting, and this stage was very important because it was the time to encourage students to awake their eagerness, the intention of reading in this case. So they were anticipating, they were predicting, and all these activities had to vary, otherwise they will get bored. And they will get bored because if you read in the same way, if you keep doing the stages in the same order, it is going to be kind of not interesting for them. So it's important to think, to plan, to design the reading stages, and as well as exploring the vocabulary and the different strategies to read them. They read out loud, they read in silence, in pairs, in groups, as a whole class, individually. So the different ways of doing it, they need to be different too. Um, yes, basically that will be it. To keep it fun, to keep their enthusiasm up, to give them different options, like to read inside the classroom, outside the classroom, sitting on their desk or on the floor, like the way at the end, what was important, it was that they were reading, they were analyzing, they were reflecting, they were using the language, they were being critical. Um, Another important thing here that I remember is that we need to be flexible with timing, because I had planned some things, and at the beginning I used a lot of questions for them. So that re like if you have a lot of questions, that will they will become overwhelmed and they won't see like the main point of it. The most important questions, or at the end in each role, the most important thing was like the question was provocative. You can have only one question, but from that question it can show you, or it can take you to different places and stages to work with the students. So as I told you before, yes, the length of the text was not a problem. What was important with the text was the issue, the topic. They felt more related to it, and the way of the way of we did it. It was also interesting for them, because it was not like the same things we are used to do inside the classroom. And finally, one of the outcomes is related to the students' perception. It is very important to listen to our students during the whole process. They are very honest. Some of them were telling me, yes, I like this test, I didn't like this test, I struggled with the vocabulary, I had to ask my partner for advice, or I didn't understand these words. So my friend helped me to understand it. I use a translator, I use a dictionary, but is to listen, to keep listening to them. While I was listening to them, I was changing and reshaping things. That's why I changed the way or the quantity of questions we had for each role. That's when I decided not to worry about the grade, and also to give them like the opportunity to use the language without punishment too, because they were like, teacher, what are you going to grade? So the things that I took into account, for example, it was that they were participating in the class, that they were doing the reading in the way I told them to, or for example, if I told them to work on groups, so they were actually participating inside the group, or not letting one person to be in charge of all the activity. I also took into account that they followed the instructions to create the journal and to develop the activity, um, that they handled on time the activities, and when I had the time and the opportunity to read with them their product, I did it so. So I was listening to them at that time too. And as I told you before, to be flexible with timing, for example, and to be open to changes. Now, what are the conclusions that I have from here? Or from this experience, that critical literacy and reflection in journaling, especially, is a platform to understand and decode the text from different practices. Sometimes we're used to um, the typical reading comprehension exercises, in which we have this literal or this inferential comprehension. But when you give them the opportunity um, to go deeper, to understand the text in all its aspects as a coach, that I'm the one that is using the text, I'm the one that is understanding the text, that I can analyze the background in which the author wanted and wrote the text, and also how this text affects me, or is let's say, empowering me to be different, to change, to identify the injustices, or to see the good things on them. Uh, the second one is that Through critical literacy and journaling, the students created a bridge between the text and their sociocultural and political and economic realities. As I told you before, it is very important to not only focus, or well, you can do it, but let's say that to focus on the context our students are really immersed. They have different interests, and sometimes they are so different, they vary so much that you cannot, let's say, to take into account all of them, because as I said, I had 40 students in one grade, and maybe each one of them had a different musical taste, or or they like to do different things, but they were all in a school, they were all immersed in a family, they were all worried because it was their last year of high school, about their future and what is going to happen with our work. And it's also important because they use the language. So sometimes if you're worried about the curriculum, you can focus the type of a text that you read, that you read, or the type of products that they are going to present. You can create um, a way in which, or a path in which, you mix all the requirements that we have with the school too. And as I told you at the beginning, I was only focusing on the reflections, um, but they show me that they had this writing process, um, and they were developing their abilities, their writing abilities, through all this process. Now I show you here, of course, the references that I took into account. And I don't know if you have any other question, if you want to let, or if you want to know something else, you can contact me at my email. It's there. I also have Instagram user in which I share some things, but you can contact me through those two channels. It was a pleasure for me to tell you about this experience. I hope you have enjoyed it and you have inspired, or you have found any tool that it's yeah, it can be, or it can work for you in your context. Thank you so much again, and see you in the next opportunity.